All right, so somewhere beneath the rubble of what was once Ali Khamenei's compound, the supreme leader of Iran, a new Iran is beginning to take shape, and it looks a lot like the old one. Hardline clerics are dominating the new interim government, a signal to Washington that the regime isn't over. It perhaps is just changing faces, at least for now. This is far from the first time that the U.S. has tried to overthrow a government. It's not even the first time that the U.S. has tried to overthrow the Iranian government. There was, of course, Operation Ajax in 1953, a U.S. and British-backed coup to overthrow the democratically elected prime minister at the time. And then in his place, the U.S. installed Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the authoritarian ruler, cementing deep anti-American sentiment that persists to this day. The U.S. support of the deeply unpopular Shah continued all the way up until 1979, when the Islamic Revolution swept across the country and then installed the Ayatollah as the supreme leader. You don't need me to remind you, of course, about what happened next. 52 American hostages were taken, and they were held for 444 days. Then George W. Bush labeled Iran part of the so-called axis of evil. President Obama spent years negotiating a nuclear deal, one that had the backing of all of our major allies. President Trump tore it up in his first term and is now demanding a new deal while bombing the country he expects to negotiate with. So, if you are having a little bit of deja vu and flashbacks to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, well, it's because you're not alone.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
My belief is we will, in fact, be greeted as liberators.
To the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand.
There will always be some uncertainty about how quickly he can acquire a nuclear weapon, but we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
They can never have a nuclear weapon.
All right, so, Ayman, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of an overview about the three men who are running Iran right now. What do we know about them?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think probably to the surprise of the U.S. that the Iranian government, if you will, the regime, was quickly able to announce an interim council of three men that has already apparently met twice today, according to state media. We even have a picture of them. So it looks like they were confident enough or safe enough to carry that meeting out. And one of them is somebody that most people who are following this story know, and that is the person in the middle. That is President Masoud Pezeshkian. He is the current president of Iran. But the two others are interesting figures. One is from the Guardian Council, Ayatollah Ali Reza Arafi. And then the other is the head of the judiciary, or I should say the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court there, Golan Hossein Mohsenejadeh. The interesting thing about that is those two clerics that you see there are hardliners, right? One actually used to be the Minister of Intelligence and then is now head of, or the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The other is part of the Guardian Council, which is kind of this body that looks at all the legislation that has passed. It looks at and vets candidates to make sure that they comply with the principles of the Islamic Revolution. And so what we're seeing right now is an early indication of where the next regime leader might come out of. And it is, probably to the dismay of many in the U.S. administration, somebody who looks to be a hardliner.
So the different factions that are going to be looking to fill the power vacuum, the security state, that apparatus, then you've got the clerics, then you've got, the more technocratic political elites.
Right.
Clearly, it seems like the advantage would be with the entrenched cleric, and then the security stakes, they have the arms.
Yeah, and it's such an important question because one of the things that happened today was that the Iranian foreign minister gave an interview to Al Jazeera where he talked about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and he actually says that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are now operating independently. So a lot of these ballistic missiles that we're seeing are actually now being launched by the Revolutionary Guard, who are operating independent from the political echelon of what remains, if you will, of the Iranian regime. And that's a scary thought. But I think part of that was because the Iranians had anticipated an American decapitation strike. And so they probably set this plan into motion, saying that if the supreme leader was killed, if the president was killed, if any of the top ministers and chiefs were killed, implement this plan automatically. So I think we're in that phase right now where the military, I should be more specific, the Revolutionary Guard, is operating independently from what is happening politically. And that's a scary thought, because if they begin to operate completely independently and feel emboldened and have their own command and control structure that doesn't, respond to the political echelon or even a future supreme leader, then you're going to see this continued fracturing, if you will, or the diffusion of this political system or the power within this political system among all these rival factions.
So who would we want in charge? I mean, if you could wave a magic wand and say, this is the person who takes over the mantle of leadership of this country, whether we're prioritizing American security interests or the interests of the Iranian people, who would that be, or what would that person look like?
If there was a short list, on top of that short list would probably be a handful of people, among them Khatami, the former president of Iran, somebody who was considered a reformer by Iranian standards, and somebody who a lot of young people in Iran at one point looked up to and said maybe he can provide some reform, because he was willing to engage with the West several years ago, and with that open perhaps economic relief for the country. There is another person who led the Green Revolution, Mousavi, who back in 2011 led a very popular uprising demanding a lot of reforms, but he has been under house arrest. There are people within the system of the Islamic regime who are considered reformers, but most of those are sometimes sidelined by the Guardian Council for being too reform-minded. And this was one of the major, if you will, challenges that Khamenei had, is he was a hardliner who always distrusted the United States. And every time a reformer came into power, elected as president, or tried to change the system, they would go to Khamenei and say, look, you're taking the country in a slightly authoritarian rule, no doubt about it, but you're also isolating it from the international community, and the sanctions are getting worse. And he was always very reluctant to give them more power. And that's why the ripping up of the JCPOA was such a blow to the moderate reformers in the country, because a lot of them who had said, hey, let's try to negotiate with the Americans. This is a good window for us. We have President Obama. We can get relief. We can agree on some uranium agreement. He was very reluctant to go along with that, but he said, okay, go along with it. Try to see if you can get a deal with the Americans. They got a deal. Trump rips it up. And Khamenei then turns around and says to all the reformers, I told you so. I told you that you cannot trust the Americans and you can't make a deal with them. And ever since, the reformers within the Islamic Republic have been marginalized. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any attempt right now for people like Khatami or Mousavi, who's been under house arrest, to reemerge into the political landscape.
Well, it's been unclear, very unclear, how much weight the Trump administration is going to exercise when it comes to regime change. Because on the one hand, Trump says he wants regime change.
And now they're saying it's not.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's not regime change.
So how the maneuvering within the region as regional powers are trying to get their security situation in check as they're getting just pummeled. Yeah. What are you hearing from your sources in the region about those capitals and those leaders and how they are looking at the next month, maybe, of hostilities?
I think the relationship between Iran and the Gulf Arab states has fundamentally changed forever. I think this was a massive miscalculation by the Iranians to attack these Arab countries, who many actually had diplomatic relations with Iran. I mean, the United Arab Emirates did, Saudi Arabia did, Qatar certainly did. And there was a hope that if you could at least kind of maintain these cordial economic relationships, you would not find yourself in this state of war. But now that the Iranians have attacked these Gulf countries, there's tremendous disappointment and anger and frustration with the Iranians that I think going forward, irrespective of what happens with the regime itself, will fundamentally change the relationship between the Gulf countries and Iran. And obviously we're seeing President Trump there returning back to Washington, D.C. after spending a few days in Mar-a-Lago. He did not take any questions from reporters upon landing. But it's interesting because I think, we've been talking a lot about how he has to make the case to the American people. But there are a lot of people in the Republican base, the America First crowd, who have totally been dismayed by what he has done. I mean, I keep going back to promises he made on the campaign trail where Iran, no war with Iran, no new wars, was such an appeal to him compared to all the other Republican candidates that were running in 2016 and 2024, that it's just hard to imagine those people coming back into the fold.
Well, and those are voters who do believe in a more anti-war, less interventionist foreign policy. They are feeling the heat in their wallets in this economy, and they don't want all of these trillions of dollars being wasted overseas for war that their sons and daughters have a higher likelihood of getting sent to fight.